Hello there, Mr. Magoo. I was thinking about how you're not going to be able to see for a couple of days and how frustrating that will probably be. And so I thought I would send you a little recording of something to listen to while you wait for those beautiful baby greens to be healthy again. And I remember that when Jonathan Gold was talking about Calvin Trillin, both of us were interested in learning more about him. So I ordered a copy of the Tummy Trilogy, which I can't even stand saying that title. It's so awful. But it's a collection of his that has 3 books. The first is called American Fried. The second is called Alice, Let's Eat. And the third is called Third Helpings. So I'm going to read from American Fried because that's the one that Jonathan Gold references in his movie. So the very first chapter is called The Traveling Man's Burden, and it's pretty short. So I'm going to start with this installment, and I haven't read this at all yet or even taken a look at it, so I don't know if it's going to be interesting or worth a read. So let's just try this one and see, and if it's good, I'll read you another. Okay, here goes. The Traveling Man's Burden. The best restaurants in the world are, of course, in Kansas City. Not all of them, only the top 4 or 5. Anyone who has visited Kansas City and still doubts that statement has my sympathy. You never made it to the right places. Being in a traveling trade myself, I know the problem of asking someone in a strange city for the best restaurant in town and being led to some purple palace that serves continental cuisine and has as its chief creative employee a menu writer rather than a chef. I have sat in those places, an innocent wayfarer, reading a 3-paragraph description of what the trout is wrapped in, how long it has been sautéed, what province its sauce comes from, and what it is likely to sound like sizzling on my platter. A description lacking only the information that before the poor beast went through that process, it had been frozen for 8.5 months. In American cities the size of Kansas City, a careful traveling man has to observe the rule that any restaurant, the executives... Sorry, I'm reaching for a bottle of water. And I thought I could do it while I read, but I can't. So, brief intermission, 1 paragraph in, for me to have a sip of Nanesqueen. All right, back at it. In American cities the size of Kansas City, a careful traveling man has to observe the rule that any restaurant the executive secretary of the Chamber of Commerce is particularly proud of is almost certainly not worth eating in. Its name will be something like La Maison de la Casa House, Continental Cuisine. Its food will sound European, but taste as if the continent they had in mind was Australia. Lately, a loyal chamberman in practically any city is likely to recommend one of those restaurants that have sprouted in the past several years on the tops of bank buildings, all of them encased in glass and some of them revolving, offering the diner not only continental cuisine and a 20,000-word menu, but a spectacular view of other restaurants spinning around the top of other bank buildings. No, thank you, I finally said to the 12th gracious host who invited me to one of those. I never eat in a restaurant that's over 100 feet off the ground and won't stand still. What is saddest about a visitor sitting in the Continental Cuisine Palace, chewing on what an honest menu would have identified as frozen duck à l'orange soda pop, is that he is likely to have passed a spectacular restaurant on the way over. Despite the best efforts of forward-looking bankers and mad dog franchisers, there's still great food all over the country. But the struggle is to wring information from the locals about where it is served. It can sometimes lead a traveler to be too exhausted to eat. I often manage to press on with a seemingly hopeless interrogation only because of my certain knowledge that the information is available, discussed openly by the residents in their own homes, the way that French villagers might have discussed what they really thought of the occupation troops they had been polite to in the shops. As it happens, I grew up in Kansas City and spent hours of my youth talking about where a person could find the best fried chicken in the world, or the best barbecue ribs in the world, or the best hamburgers in the world. All, by chance, available at that time within the city limits of Kansas City, Missouri. I grew up among the kind of people whose response some years later to a preposterous claim about Little Rock's having a place that served better spare ribs than the ones served by Arthur Bryant's Barbecue at 18th in Brooklyn was to fly to Little Rock, sample the ribs, sneer, and then fly back to Kansas City. Knowing that the information exists does make me impatient if some civic booster in, say, one of the middle-sized cities of the Southwest is keeping me from dinner by answering my simple questions about restaurants with a lot of talk about the wine cellar of some palace that has inlaid wallpaper chosen personally by a man who is supposed to be the third best interior decorator in San Francisco. As the booster goes on about the onion soup with croutons and the sophisticated head waiter named Jean-Pierre, my mind sometimes wanders off into a fantasy in which my interrogation of the booster is taking place in the presence of one of those ominous blonde Germans from the World War II films, the ones with the steel blue eyes and the small scars, who sat silently in the corner while the relatively civilized German line officer asked the downed Allied flyer for military information. I do hope you will now agree to tell me if there is any Mexican food worth eating around here and quit talking about the glories to be found in La Maison de la Casa House, continental cuisine, I tell the booster. If not, I'm afraid Herr Mueller here has his methods. It is common for an American... You know, Mr. Calvin-Trellan's sentence structure is very difficult to read out loud. He has a lot of run-on sentences, but I digress. It is common for an American city to be vaguely embarrassed about its true delights. In the 50s, a European visitor to New Orleans who insisted on hearing some jazz was routinely taken to hear a group of very respectable-looking white businessmen play Dixieland. A few years ago, I suspect, an Eastern visitor to Nashville, who asked a local banker if there was any interesting music in town, might have been taken by a circuitous route in order to avoid overhearing any of the crude twanging coming out of the Grand Ole Opry or the country recording studios, to the home of a prominent dermatologist who had some friends around every Friday night for chamber music. Is that true? In most cities, a booster is likely to insist on defending the place to outsiders in terms of what he thinks of as sophisticated standards of New York, a city he makes clear at the start he would not consider living in even if the alternative was moving his family and belongings to Yakistak, Siberia, USSR. A visitor, particularly a visitor from the East, is invariably subjected to a 30-minute commercial about the improvement in the local Philharmonic, a list of Broadway plays, musicals, that have been through in the past year, and some comment like, "We happen to have an excellent French restaurant here now." The short answer to that one, of course, would be, no, you don't. An American city's supply of even competent French restaurants is limited by the number of residents willing to patronize them steadily. And, given the difficulty of finding or importing ingredients and capturing a serious chef and attracting clientele sufficiently critical to keep the chef from spending most of his time playing the commodities market out of boredom, an excellent French restaurant will arrive in Tulsa or Omaha at about the same time those places near the waterfront in Marseille start turning out quality pan-fried chicken. In New York, where I live now, the few restaurants that even pretend to serve French food, comparable to the food available in the best restaurants in France, are maintained at a cost so high that dinner at any one of them seems bound, sooner or later, to face competition from the round-trip airfare to Paris or Lyon. I'm sure that's not pronounced Lion. You can ask your sister. Lyon. Lyon. I don't suppose your friends took you to Mary Mac's on Ponce de Leon for a bowl of pot liquor, did they? I once said to a friend of mine who had just returned from her first visit to Atlanta. Naturally not. No civic-minded residents of Atlanta, which advertises itself as the world's next great city, would take an out-of-town guest to Mary Mac's. Their idea of a regional eating attraction is more likely to be someplace built to look like one of the charming antebellum houses in Atlanta, once that Atlanta practically had none of, having been, before Sherman got there, an almost new railroad terminus that had all the antebellum charm of Parsons, Kansas. Pot liqueur, I told my friend, is the liquid left in the bottom of the greens pot, is eaten like a soup after crumbling some cornbread into it, and is what a great city would advertise instead of a lot of golf courses. They took me to a very nice French restaurant, she said, gamely claiming that it was almost as good as the one she can go to for lunch on the days she doesn't feel like walking far enough to get to the decent places. Since "no, you don't" would be considered an impolite reply to the usual boast about a city's having a 3-star French restaurant, I have, in the past, stooped to such responses as, "French food makes me break out." I love French food. In fairness, I should say that I can think of a nation whose... Sorry. In fairness, I should say that I can't think of a nation whose food I don't love, although in Ethiopia I was put off a bit by the appearance of the bread, which looks like a material that has dozens of practical uses, not including being eaten as food. But who wants to hear a skin doctor saw away at the cello when Johnny Cash is right down the street? Lately, when the local booster informs me, as the city ordinance apparently requires him to do so within 10 minutes of meeting anyone who lives in New York, that he would never live in New York himself, I say something like, well, it's not easy, of course. There's no barbecue to speak of. That's because of a shortage of hickory wood, I think, although I haven't checked out that theory with Arthur Bryant. We don't really have any Mexican restaurants. I mean, the kind you find in Texas, say. Oh, we have Mexican restaurants run by maybe a guy from the East Side who picked up a few recipes while he was down in San Miguel de Allende thinking about becoming a painter, but no Mexican family restaurants. No Señora in the kitchen. No Coors beer. No Lone Star. I wouldn't claim that you can live in New York and expect to drink Lone Star. There's a shortage of Chicago-style pizza on the south of 14th Street. And they don't know much about boiling crabs in New York, and it's only since the soul food places opened up that we've been able to get any fried chicken. We still don't have those family-style fried chicken places with the fresh vegetables and the pickled watermelon rind on the table. Sure, we got problems. Grits are a problem. I'd be the last one to say that living in New York is easy. Somehow, people listened to my entire speech and then suggested that I forget my troubles with some fine continental cuisine at Le Maison de la Casa House. I'm then forced into playing the restaurant section of the Yellow Pages, trying one system after another, like a thoroughly addicted horse player who would rather take his chances with a palpably bad system than give up the game altogether. I go with the small listings for a while. No place that says anything like, see advertisement page 253 of this section. Then places called by someone's first name. Then places not called by someone's first name. For a while, I tried a complicated formula having to do with the number of specialties claimed in relation to the size of the entry, but I can never remember whether the formula called for me to multiply or divide. Constant traveling has provided me with some information on some cities, of course, but the discovery process remains a strain. Who would have ever guessed, for instance, that the old Mexican street near downtown Los Angeles, that looks as if it were restored by the MGM set decorators and stocked by one of the less tasteful wholesalers in Tijuana, would have the one place that serve delicious hand-patted soft tacos with picadillo or chicharron. How can an innocent traveler be expected to guess that he is going to be subjected to the old Hollywood mystery film trick of hiding the real jewel in a case full of paste imitations? There are some types of food that do lend themselves to sophisticated techniques of interrogation. When an Italian restaurant is suggested, for instance, I always say, "Who controls the city council here?" I suppose a good Italian restaurant could exist in a city that doesn't have enough Italians to constitute at least a powerful minority in city politics, but a man in town for only 2 or 3 meals has to go with the percentages. It is axiomatic that good barbecue is almost never served in an obviously redecorated restaurant. The reason being, according to my favorite theory on the subject, that walls covered with the slick pre-cut paneling let the flavor slide away. Some time ago, I found myself in Muskogee, Oklahoma, with dinner time approaching, and I asked some people I was having a drink with if they knew of any good barbecue places. Through a system of what amounted to ethnic elimination, I had arrived at barbecue as the food most likely to see me through the evening. There is, I'm relieved to say, no continental cuisine in Muskogee, Oklahoma. The people I was having a drink with were trying to be helpful, perhaps because the liquor laws of Oklahoma see to it that citizens who are taking a bourbon in public feel so much like criminals, having skulked in through an unmarked back door and flashed some patently phony membership cards, that we had developed the closeness of conspirators. Even states that allow grown-ups to drink in public with comparative ease expect a traveler to observe some bizarre liquor laws, of course, including at least one I approve of. The Vermont statute that makes it illegal for a customer to carry a drink from one table to another. I have found that a man who picks up his drink and moves to your table is invariably a man who's going to talk at length about how many miles his car gets to the gallon. One barbecue place was mentioned, but something about the way it was mentioned made me suspicious. "They have plates there?" I asked. "What do you mean plates?" one of my fellow criminal boozers asked me. "You know, plates you eat off of," I said. "Of course they have plates," he said. "You have any other barbecue restaurants around here?" I asked. "I've eaten a fine barbecue on plates. Arthur Bryant, in fact, uses plates. But I would hesitate to eat barbecue in a place that has plates, of course, or naturally, or certainly. The next piece of information an outsider is likely to extract about such a place is that it also serves steaks and chicken and maybe even a stray lobster tail. "Well," my partner in crime began, "there's an old colored fellow out on the highway who—" "Tell me how to get there," I said. It turned out to be a small diner, and if it had been a half-mile closer, I might have been able to locate it unassisted by following the perfume of burning hickory logs. There were, as it happened, no plates. The proprietor's version of the formal restaurant custom of including a dinner plate on top of a larger plate at each place setting was to put down a piece of butcher paper and then a piece of wax paper and then the barbecue. First-class barbecue. It would have been a thoroughly satisfying meal, except that my success in finding the place caused me to ponder, all through dinner, on how much happier traveling would be if only I could think of a workable formula for finding fried chicken restaurants. All right, and that is chapter 1, The Traveling Man's Burden. So I quite like Mr. Calvin Trellian's language. He's got quite a bit of snark. He actually reminds me of you a little bit. Some of the things he said. And of course, the focus on fried chicken. It sounds awfully Davis-like. So, I have a feeling you might be a fan. It doesn't lend itself completely to being read out loud, but now that I've got his flow down a little bit, I think I'll send you another chapter 2, if you're interested. But you can also tell me if it is painful to slog through as an audiobook, and I can choose something else for your next installment. yeah, I really hope that you're recovering well and that surgery went well and that it didn't hurt too much. And send me a picture. I guess you probably can't take a selfie with your eyes not working, but I'd be curious to see what you look like after. And I hope you're having a really, really great time home. I'm laying in bed. I have your I Bleed purple and gold shirt on. And yeah, I miss you already. It's been a busy work week. I've got a huge presentation to my full staff yesterday, and then I had a big meeting today, and I just got asked to present at a board meeting in Santa Fe on the 23rd. So I'm going to New Mexico, and they got me a really swanky hotel room. So I have no idea what it costs to get to New Mexico, but if you want to join me for a long weekend, it could be fun. And yeah, I'm gonna work. Monday's Labor Day, but I decided I'm gonna work and then save my holiday, and the day after you get back, I will take the day or at least the morning off so that so we can have a nice slow morning and catch up. But this is over 20 minutes long, so I don't even know if it's gonna send. It might be too big, but I'm gonna try so that you can have a little note from me tomorrow. So I will sign off here, but good night or good morning or good afternoon, depending on what time of day this hits you. And I will talk to you soon.